The year is 1991, and we follow a ruthless Wall Street investor who targets a struggling wire and cable company in order to liquidate it, based on his philosophy of survival of the fittest. Opposing him is an idealistic lawyer who believes businesses have a responsibility to workers and communities. Their flirty battle of wit becomes a debate over the value of community versus the value of shareholders. This film blends humor with serious themes, using witty dialogue to expose the moral ambiguity of both sides. Ultimately, it does not offer easy answers, but invites viewers to reflect on the balance between profit and responsibility. Its message remains relevant in today's economic climate, where similar conflicts continue to shape industries and livelihoods. The unlikely chemistry of Danny DeVito and Penelope Ann Miller drives the film, while old standbys like Gregory Peck and Piper Laurie hold the film together. This week on Back to the Balcony, we cover Other People's Money. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. And, this has always been a favorite of mine. Came out in 1991. I loved this era of early 90s mature comedies. I'll put My Cousin Vinny on the list of probably the most popular of those comedies of the day. And the fact that Danny DeVito can play a leading man role in what essentially is a romantic comedy just goes to show that Hollywood aesthetics doesn't really matter if performance and dialogue and script and structure are all intact. And in my opinion, this movie is a perfect reflection of that. In any other case, you probably wouldn't buy an attraction between a woman like Penelope Ann Miller and a man like Danny DeVito. But what the movie does is it kind of pulls the Wall Street trick, but in a nicer way, that there is this kind of appeal to this kind of corporate yuppie mentality that was so big in the 80s and 90s, where attraction really didn't have anything to do with physicality. It had to do with power, prowess, intelligence, and drive. And I feel like this is now kind of like a relic of that era, but it is relevant in the terms of what we're dealing with today. The corporations kind of always win. Now, there are going to be some ups and downs to, I think, the moral of the story, the parable, if you will, of what's right and what's wrong, because we thought very differently back in the 80s and 90s about it. But as a comedy, this still held up really well for me. What about you?
This is going to be a disagreement. When I was younger, I remember having the same effect as like The Secret from Our Success is I felt it was simplistic enough to be entertaining. I liked it. But now that I'm older, I see the flaws. And just like The Secret of My Success, it's still simplistic, but now the flaws come to surface. And I think if we get to the point in this movie, it was a pivotal moment where I had to reflect, where we have Danny DeVito deliver the line, "I want to have your babies." It's intense, it's direct, it's so unearned chemistry to the point when he delivers that line, I said, Danny DeVito is going to be my paralysis monster, where he's sitting in the corner of my ceiling, staring at me, delivering this line over and over again. But with that said, this is going to be a butt opinion of mine. I still liked it. I still find it entertaining.
Yeah.
I still like some of the messaging, even though it doesn't really get there at the end. It's simplistic enough with the on-screen likability, but if you're a fan of the talent to enjoy it, you will enjoy this movie, but I think it is a rough movie when it comes to dialogue, when it comes to chemistry. It doesn't find its footing, and we'll get into it, but the dialogue doesn't really complement these characters. The characters, the performances, the on-screen likability of these two deliver this movie, and nothing else really works for me other than the on-screen likability. I think this movie is a mess, but it's still simplistic fun.
Well, and I think, again, we're looking at a time where movies like this, the simplistic fun, like you say, is all you needed. to have a movie kind of just work for people. I feel like movies overcompensate these days. And we've talked about this many times in the show where there is something to be said about the simplicity of the films of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'm going to say like movies that were kind of like the antithesis to whatever big blockbuster bullshit was out there. And we've done enough Siskel and Ebert reviews now that they actually appreciated smaller films like this because they were tired of the big blockbuster bullshit. Now, we've covered many movies like this. They were based on a stage play. And oftentimes we've discussed how some of those movies feel like they were kind of stuck being shot theatrically like a stage play. I feel this one does a really good job at bringing us into the cinematic world by, taking us back and forth from New York to, the New England Wire and Cable Company, really those two locations, Rhode Island, essentially. I do like the fact that there is a little bit of Americana to this, where we do see this old-fashioned town that's, raised with grit and strength and will, and Gregory Peck is this benevolent corporate figure, right? And I think that is what really works for that era. We live in a time now of there are no benevolent billionaires. There are no benevolent corporations, so to speak. Even if they act like they are, they're not. And this movie is supposed to be, like I said, a parable of that, of it really kind of walks a fine line of how the industry changed in the 80s. Wall Street is the one that kind of like just painted a full picture of what it was like. Corporations rule everything. Greed is good. And what this movie does is it tries to preach that message, but it tries to massage it in there. There is kind of like this way of he's trying to motivationally speak and convince small town shareholders and corporate shareholders that his way is the best way. And this is my controversial opinion. In a way, he's right. In a way, he kind of saves the town. And it is a weird thing to kind of get behind because you want the small guy to win. You want the underdog to win. This would be like if you were rooting for Mr. Potter instead of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. But in a sense, the Mr. Potter of this movie kind of has a point. The old-fashioned pride in the modern times that this movie's set in isn't the right thing because his wire and cable company is going to drag everything down. So I think the ambiguity of the message of the movie is actually the point. And the dialogue, the romance, the witty banter of these two highly motivated people is just the vessel to kind of massage the fact that the old ways were dead. Welcome to the new era of industry. I don't feel good about it, but at the same time, I understand the movie's message. And maybe the point is like, it's not supposed to be a feel-good movie. It's supposed to be like a gentle way of explaining the old times are over.
If it's a massage, it's a first day student at massage school because it does massage the message. And the kind of the killer for me is we have the romance bogging it down. And when we have the chemistry lacking between these two, and that's a majority of the movie with some inserts of corporate America, and we bank on the speech of Danny DeVito at the end, which 100% you're right. But I think the speech is what makes it. It's what kind of ties everything together. And I don't think there's anything that really leads up to that other than snippets of DeVito just saying, I want money, I need profit. And then there's a romance and rinse and repeat. So, and I think that's where I think it's either, and I don't want to blame the cast on this because I think DeVito on-screen likability and Miller on-screen likability, solid performances, but the dialogue doesn't support the performances. It's almost like they're adding aesthetics in. And this is my problem with how they build this chemistry is Ann Miller sounds like in the introduction when we have this chemistry, she sounds like a phone sex operator every time she's interacting with DeVito. And that is like a light switch on trying to say, hey, there's sexual chemistry here. Let's add a seductive voice to a phone conversation to say, hey, there's an attraction here where we could have added dialogue when we have DeVito. And I hate myself for saying this, but this is almost an alternate world of The Secret of My Success, where instead of having a short, young business owner, whatever it may be, we have a short, bald, middle-aged man trying to chase the girl. And this is my problem with the movie, is that it adds aesthetics in to justify it. We have Danny DeVito 12 times eating donuts, smoking cigarettes, and it's to justify it. And the dialogue doesn't give us a shining light into who this character is. Give us something of substance to really justify the romance, to justify his intent. Don't just add a Dunkin' Donut promotion in there to kind of justify the Danny DeVito character. Make him want to be likable in a relationship. And we see the violin scene over the phone. That's all sweet and all. And I wanted more of that. We can't just have one sentimental scene of winning the girl over. We have to have multiple, but it's too segmented when it comes to business, romance, and outcome for me to really buy into the romantic comedy of it all. So I think it's really bogged down with what it's really trying to do, and it doesn't find its footing up until the climax where we see that final speech and we see him get the girl and done. So it's not really a satisfying movie, but again, but it is a really well-paced movie to get there.
And see, like, where I would have some debate and discourse on that point is I think what it's trying to do is say that with motivated people, with people with big egos, business-driven people, hustlers, so to speak, in the modern day parlance, the physical attraction and let's say the romance isn't necessarily what draws them together. It's almost like a dick swinging contest between the two of them. And that is what causes the attraction. The attraction is more about outdoing each other, outbesting each other, more than it is submitting to the other person romantically or physically. And I think Penelope Ann Miller, that is something I really like about this performance because at the end of the day, she's a small town girl who's gone to the big city to become a lawyer, and she's developed this thick-skinned characteristic that she is essentially the monster to go after the other monster, right? Our biggest complaint about The Secret of My Success is that Helen Slater's character is a pushover, and she's shy and she's shallow. She is not the aggressive businesswoman that the character is written as. We would not believe that Helen Slater would sleep her way to the top the way she performs it. But if she performed it the way Penelope Ann Miller does in this movie, then it totally would have worked. And that's what I think that movie was lacking that this movie has. She's created this persona of a small town girl who's come and become essentially a woman with as big a dick as these other guys on Wall Street. And that is what he's drawn to. He could probably have any woman he wanted, regardless of his height and stature and donut diet, because of the money and influence and power that he has. That honestly means nothing to her until they start fighting. And it's the battle, it's the outwitting of each other. It's the wit and the banter that she is attracted to because all of a sudden it's a challenge. And she feels like she's in a point in her life where no one is a challenge anymore. And it's that challenge of him that she's attracted to. And then the little romanticisms, the dinner, the mushroom dip, the violin, that's just frosting, right? That just kind of adds on top of it. It's almost as if she lives in a world where men are too afraid to be themselves around her. They have to put on a facade. And Danny DeVito in any movie is always great at playing himself as who he is. Short, bald, fat, it doesn't matter. I'm big personality. And you can't help but be attracted to that in some way, whether it's romantically, physically, or whatever. You want to be around it because you don't see that kind of confidence every day. And I think that's what the movie is trying to do.
Ann Miller definitely has the biggest dick in this movie because I agree with you 100%. Is she does have a majority of the screen time explaining her next move, explaining what she's going to do, explaining, but we don't understand on a sentimental level what her intent is. But when we go to DeVito, it's opposite. It's we don't understand really how he got his money other than just being thrown into he trades stock with a computer, et cetera, et cetera. But then we switch over to the sentimental. This is where I have the problem is it was too quick. I love a good romantic comedy where it's a cat and mouse kind of game where we have two competitors going at each other, but we don't have that arc. We don't have that transition to say this other than profession of competition. This is why we're attracted to each other. This is why we're going to crescendo into something bigger. We almost get a light switch, a snap of a finger saying, well, we're competitors. we're eventually going to sleep together. We're going to have a sexual attraction. There's no real arc to this chemistry. And it's just very basic, simplistic dialogue where it takes the viewer to say, just assume it. It's the 90s, assume it. These two they have a conflict. They're competing against businesses. They're going to end up together. Just go with it. And to an extent, I'm fine with it. But during the second act, I needed something to really make that feel natural, to make it feel like there's some stake to it, where I'm going to go to the climax wondering if these two, even though we know it's going to happen, if these two are going to end up together or what that conflict is really going to end with. But even when we get to the climax, we already know what's going to happen because the movie's dialogue sets us up for that, saying, well, if you win, we're going to end up together. If you win, we're going to end up together. There's no mystery to it. There's no stakes to it, even though I can appreciate the performances. But again, I go back to my previous point. The dialogue doesn't support the powerhouse of likability and performances that the casting director sought out to do, saying, these are the two that's really going to bring us home. And I appreciate the fact that you said the aesthetics of the physical appearance don't matter, because you're right, it shouldn't. But the dialogue should support it, even if it's a pivot in the movie saying, hey, we need a little bit more here between these two because we're not really reaching the goal that we set out to do. So I think when it comes to these two, I think there's a talent here, but the writing and the pivot from our director really doesn't get us to the believability of these two.
I think the movie's saving grace, though, is that it doesn't rely on the romantic comedy to make it a successful movie. The whole point of the movie is this philosophy of capitalism now versus capitalism of the era that this company was built in. And I think when you add those two components together, you get a full package movie. The fact that Danny DeVito is, I'm going to say, a more benevolent version of Gordon Gekko, because Gordon Gekko just wants to buy companies, crush them, break them up, sell them into pieces, regardless of what's going on. He essentially is just a trash man, right? No qualms, no guilt, no anything. Danny DeVito, his character in this one, Garfield, he has a different mentality about it. His philosophy is he wants to make money by making the things more successful and then, essentially liquidating them where he needs to. But he's not just making money for him, he's making money for other shareholders. And it's not like he went in like behind Gregory Peck's back. In fact, the most honest person in the movie might be Danny DeVito's character. He doesn't lie at all. Everything is out on the table. He goes there and explains, hey, you have a very successful business. With all these little businesses and land and deals and stuff, you have no debt, you're not insolvent, but this one chunk of business that you have like tied your hat to is what's going to bring it all down. And people like me can come in and save it, and therefore save the shareholders, save the town, and save your legacy. He's kind of he's not the bad guy here. He's got a good point. And that's where we really have to have like a moral justification of where we sit in the idea of corporation versus like small town businessman. That's the dilemma. And I feel like by having the romantic comedy aspect and this moral dilemma in the same movie, you're not weighing one against the other. They're supposed to complement each other. So I say judge the movie just on the shortcomings of the romantic side of it is kind of giving the movie a disservice in a way. And our critics kind of allude to that. What I will give you is they try to land the ending on the romantic comedy side, and that's because test audiences hated the original ending. There was an original ending to this movie, as one of the critics says, where the town does go under because they, fight it. Gregory Peck dies because he loses everything, but eventually the two main characters wind up married down the line. But essentially, it's like an epilogue, right? You don't get all that information. And people want satisfaction. People want light at the end of the tunnel, especially in this era. So they change the ending to make it a little bit more Hollywood friendly, right? And I think that is the most disappointing thing because it seems so unearned. Yet that's what test audiences and studios do. They screw shit up by wanting satisfaction of something. They can't just be left with an ambiguous ending or an ending that's a downer because it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a moral lesson of what can happen in business and love. But people don't want that. They want the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why I feel the romantic part of it crashes, because the ending feels so off from what the rest of the movie is.
I love it when they define a movie as we don't know where to go with it, so it becomes a romantic comedy. So there's romance in it.
Oh, I hate it. And
there's drama to it. There's no in between. This movie should be, you know what? Let's add an in between. Sweet. Because you can go a couple different directions with it, because this shouldn't be defined as a comedy, because I didn't laugh once. I did go, a couple different times. So this is where we need an in-between that, because this isn't a comedy. Almost if I was in a test screening, I haven't seen the alternate ending, but I think that probably would have matched a little bit better to what we got, other than just kicking your feet up saying, I got my way. Because there's really nothing that defines comedy here other than two people wanting to be together. The only comedic thing I laughed at is the Danny DeVito, I want to have your babies look, and that wasn't intentional. The sex voice to build the chemistry, that wasn't intentional. So I think this is where I am really lost and torn with this movie. Is I know it's entertaining, but I am solely basing it off of the likability of performances, nothing in regards to the movie. I can see the messaging, I can appreciate the messaging, but this isn't a romantic comedy. It's just two people that are really defining a conflict and trying to justify a conflict, justify why they should be together, and there's no real banter in between. So I think, but I will say this, in a lot of the filmmaking I've seen in this movie, I never realized how beautiful Danny DeVito's eyelashes are. So with all the up close shots we get, this one really said, you know what? I'm reflecting how many up close shots of Danny DeVito we've gotten from past movies to just zoom in on his eyelashes. And that's a different rewatch. But anyway, this, again, to my previous point, it's not a comedy. It's not funny. It's message driven, but it's all situational. It's throwing darts at the board to hope things land with the last speech. But there's nothing that defines this movie as a comedy.
I disagree. I laughed a lot, but I agree. It's not like a laugh out loud knee slapper comedy. It's a comedy the way like Doc Hollywood is a comedy, right? Where it's more about social class and social status and the idiosyncrasies of it that us common folk should and can laugh at, right? Like, I think it's hilarious, the scene where she storms out of the little dinner and then his driver comes in and essentially they just know to sit down and eat the dinner that was prepared, because that's not the first time a woman stormed out of that house and they've sat and eaten the dinner together. Like, there's moments in the movie that I just genuinely got a good chuckle out of, because it's nuanced, right? It's nuanced of like, these rich assholes are just like us in certain ways. Like, it's all a big facade, but they really have their life falling apart behind the scenes, no matter how perfect it looks on paper. I also think the fact that he does have a romantic relationship with Carmen, his computer. I love that. The fact that that's the first person he talks to when he wakes up. It really is his soulmate, is his little stock computer named Carmen. I think that's hilarious. All right, well, so we've said what we've said about the movie. Let's hear what the critics had to say about it. Gene brought this to the show.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune, and our first film is Other People's Money, which, except for a soft ending, is a very funny and fresh look at corporate America, takeover artists, and yuppie lawyers. Danny DeVito, in a hilarious performance worthy of an Oscar nomination, plays Larry the Liquidator Garfield, a financial genius who likes to strip companies of their waste and sell off the remaining assets at a profit. Why does he do it? As he constantly says, he loves money. Other People's Money is based on a hit play, which has been changed to include a plot development involving Japanese money. And that's the part of the film I like the least. It gives the movie a fuzzy ending in which you're not sure what this picture is really saying. Instead, we just sit back and watch a delicious romantic comedy played out across the corporate boardroom. Still, despite my one objection, a strong recommendation for Other People's Money.
I mean, that's a very Gene review. I think that he is definitely favorable of it. He knows what's wrong with the movie. He's not afraid to say so. And I agree with him what's wrong with it. And I think the movie's biggest detriment is the fact that climactic scene of the speeches between Gregory Peck and Danny DeVito in front of the shareholders, that's remarkable cinema. It's well written and amazingly delivered. it is kind of Wall Street light. It is kind of the greed is good monologue light, but at the same time, there's stakes here. It's not just a convincing speech from Gordon Gekko to convince people that greed is good. Danny DeVito's there to kind of explain to the people whose money is invested in this company why he's the right answer. And as painful as it is to hear, that's the part that we have to deal with. Is like, well, he is kind of right. That's a great scene. Now, here is my biggest issue with how I see this movie now. I love Danny DeVito in this movie. I love Danny DeVito anyway. But I was thinking, like, if this was an Al Pacino and Penelope Ann Miller combination, it would have had a bit more credibility because they already worked together really well in Carlito's Way. And I feel like Pacino could have pulled this off really well. He's not handsome enough to be unconvincing, but he's also not DeVito trollish, right? Now, I like the trollish part, but I can see how it is a little bit unconvincing in the full narrative of the movie. But I also like the fact that we've got statuesque Gregory Peck playing opposite 5-foot-tall Danny DeVito in this scene. And there's just something so magical about that combination of them facing off one-on-one that I was just entranced between that dynamic because it's not natural. It feels like it shouldn't be. And you know how me, I love nuance. That nuance of little big man versus big small man, I think really makes the movie. And then you go and fuck it up with that soft ending. That I totally agree with him.
Well, I agree with him to an extent, but I don't like his word choices. I don't like best actor for Danny DeVito because I don't think that's this movie. But it is.
I mean, that's subjective.
It absolutely is. And I don't like the adjective of being a delicious romance because it's really not. Because that's my main issue with the movie is I don't think it goes far enough. It really has trouble balancing that. And we totally missed the mark of Dean Jones's character where what was the point of that? We see an elevated stakes. It's almost thrown in and it goes nowhere towards the end, which goes into the soft climax. But at the same time, I like the climax up until after the speech. And I think that's kind of where Gene is really talking about is we don't really go forward with it. We feel like there's something missing from the climax. And I think especially with the stakes attempting to raise, especially with the Dean Jones interaction, that really doesn't do anything for the plot. It almost should have just been left out at almost an hour and 45 minutes for a romantic comedy. That almost takes it back a notch. Let the movie be an hour and 40 minutes, hour and a half, and take out a lot of the things that make this movie so serious because we already have trouble, in my opinion, of balancing the romantic aspect versus the messaging. So let's not add something more to confuse what this movie is. If you really want this to be a romantic comedy with themes of corporate America, don't add more corporate America when the dialogue is already stagnant. So I think Gene liked this movie way more than I did when it comes to what he saw. And it's almost contradicting to a lot of other romantic comedies that he's reviewed in the past. But this goes on to almost a relatability factor. And I don't know if it's a phone sex voice in the beginning that he really got him hooked in this movie, or if it's just the themes of the 90 corporate America. I don't know. This could be creepy Gene being sucked into this movie. But at the same time, there's a lot of things I disagree with the wording he's putting in here because it doesn't match what I saw.
Yeah, I'll give you that. He has his own way of saying things, and I often feel a bit conflicted of how he says them as well, too. But at the same time, I'm also looking at this in the perspective of other movies that came out around this time. Movies like Working Girl, movies like How to Secret of My Success. I feel like this does a lot of that stuff better, and things that he was, let's say, more critical about in those movies, this kind of fixed for him, and I'm happy for him on that. I don't agree with all of it, but I do feel like this is a very Gene review. But Roger's review is not too dissimilar from Gene's.
A strong recommendation for me, and with the same objection. The ending is just a wimpy cop-out that doesn't really Playfair with everything that's gone before,
Right.
but it's so little and it's so
Yes.
far toward the end that you can't really object to the picture on that basis. I'll tell you, I liked both of these people so much, Danny DeVito and Penelope Ann
Yes.
Miller. It's one of those rare movies where you sit there with a grin on your face
Yes.
because they both have such obvious human motives, failings, and yet at the same time we hope for them both in a way to succeed and to get together. And as they have this business relationship that's based on absolute hatred and this personal relationship that's based on irresistible attraction, I really got involved.
See, here's my thing. I actually agree with Gene more than I do with Roger on this one. I think Roger's reading way too much into the romantic comedy side of the film and less about the corporate nuance that Gene is. So if I had to compare the two critiques together, I think Gene's is actually a little bit more on point because he is more focused on what the movie's really saying about corporate America, where Roger is like a semantic and a softie at heart in a way, and he's really focusing on that romantic. I like the chemistry between the two of them, but I'm not going to say it's like magnetic. I'm not going to say that it's like perfect chemistry. It's interesting. The fact that she's beautiful, he's not, but it's the power dynamic that's attractive. I like that. It's the princess and the frog dynamic, right? But that's not how he sees it, and that's interesting to me.
Well, and again, this is going to be a debate because I'm more on Roger's side, even though he, again, liked it way more than I did. But the aspect of I liked the characters. And I think he needs to go further into that because I think it goes into what I said earlier. I like the performances. I like the on-screen likability. This is a movie that is solely, I think, in my opinion, again, driven by the likability of how they deliver their characters. So I think based on the performances, the characters are likable to an extent because they're so simplistic. They're so basic in human nature where we have to really bank on how we view these characters based on how they portray their characters. So I think Roger is a little bit manipulated on DeVito's portrayal. And again, it's hard not to like a DeVito performance. He has that, like the John Goodman persona of just whenever he's on screen, you just get engulfed into the likability of him. And I think that's where Roger is really attaching himself to this. Is it's hard, even with this movie, to not like DeVito.
Agreed. And then they kind of finish it off together.
Well, I'm going to go back to the ending because it's not so small.
Yeah.
This is what happens. We both talked about this movie and liked this movie a real lot because of the love story between Miller and DeVito. I saw the play, and the play was about, and it was written about, money and what's happening in corporate America, and that is completely undermined by the ending of the film.
Well, I talked to Norman Jewison, who directed the film, and he told me they shot an ending that played fair with everything in the film, and then it didn't test well. Audiences came out and said, oh, the ending depressed me. And so they wrote this phony baloney ending where everything ends happily. And you know what? Jewison said he can't wait for the video to come out. He wants to make a laser disc in which he can put his ending in as an alternate ending, and then you could see the movie that he really wanted to make.
Well, that movie could have lasted for a long time. This will last as a good battle between two interesting characters.
I think he hits the nail on the head right there. It's the battle, not the romance. It's the battle between the characters that I think I'm attracted to. It reminds me of, let's say, Howard Hawks films of the 1930s and 40s. It reminds me of Bringing Up Baby. It reminds me of His Girl Friday, right? Where there is a lot of salts and pepper, oil and water dynamic between these two people, and then they kind of fall in love at the end. I love that. I'm a sucker for that. Putting in all of the business dynamics to it, like Wonderful Life did, of, big bad corporations versus the little guy. I love all that too. But this one, like I said, the twist is it actually makes you, if not empathize, understand the motives of the corporate guy in this movie. And the fact that he's not like all corporate guys. If there's one thing that he says in the movie, what makes him get ahead of the other guys is knowing how to understand the humanity of companies before he breaks them up and not just looking at them as disposable companies. What makes him successful is he looks for the good in the company and gets rid of the trash. It's almost like he's surgical with how he's doing liquidations. Not saying that's better by any means, but it does give him a little bit of humanity to cling on to and not just create a supervillain like Gordon Gekko. So I would call him an anti-villain in the sense of this movie. He's not an anti-hero. he's kind of an anti-villain, right? Like he's the villain, but at the same time, he's not in there with villainous intentions. He's not trying to like rule the world or create like some weird dystopia. It's all about money and it's about other people's money. So I think the whole idea of the movie, the plot, the title is just the kind of nuance of that. Is that it's all about other people's money, the same way that Fast Eddie Felson says money won is twice as sweet as money earned, right? There's a financial philosophy to the movie that I respect. I might not buy into it and believe it on a personal level, but I respect the philosophy. And at the end of the day, I think that's what I take away from the movie more than the romantic comedy part.
Well, and that's where I'm going to bring in the intent piece of it, because I think if we would have had a flip flop where we had proper pivoting here, where we kind of went off a loose adaptation of the play, where we got rid of the romance in the middle, we had more of the cat and mouse, and then we added the romance at the end, which would have probably been just as satisfactory because it gives us the same feeling, then that would have been a different story. But the intent of the movie, if you're going to market it as a romantic comedy, are we going into a romantic comedy looking for corporate America messaging? Are we looking for a romance? Are we looking to feel good? And even the original ending, if it didn't make audiences feel good, that tells tales to what the movie's intent originally needed to be, is given more messaging than romance. So I think this movie should have been what the original ending should have been. It might not have been exactly the feel good movie that you want, but it might have been more memorable, because what we need from a movie is not necessarily feel good, but an exclamation mark of how you're going to remember this movie. And honestly, with the climax, I didn't remember the climax until my rewatch, and I remember how limp it was. So I think this movie needed to do a complete flip flop, and the feel good moments should have come from the 15 minutes, maybe a smirk from DeVito and Ann Miller at the end saying, this is where we're going with our romance, and left audiences with that and kept with the messaging, because we would have gotten rid of the romantic comedy aspect of it and we would have had that feel good moment. So I think this movie is a little misguided, but again, this one is one of those movies that I have a hard time agreeing with the critics on how ecstatic they are with this, but I can see the fun factor to it. I will never trash this movie, but I will recognize the flaws of it. But at the end of the day, I will still rewatch this movie.
Yeah, I love this movie. This movie is a perennial for me. Now, here's the thing: is like I don't disagree with you at all, any of that. Again, that's why like I'm not a great critic of movies, because I feel like everything is subjective. I'm a downer. I like movies who like with down endings, and I love to have a surprise down ending. There's nothing better to me than have a movie that's like upbeat, 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 and then it crushes you at the end for no reason, right? That's why I loved the comedies of the late 90s, that Sundance boom, where it's like you could have like a jaunty comedy and all of a sudden someone dies at the end unexpectedly. Like the original ending of Clerks, where Dante gets shot at the end for no reason other than it's the 90s, right? This could have gone that way. It pretty much did go that way, and then they changed the ending. That's fine. Do what you got to do for a studio movie. However, since this is based on a play and you're as much a traditional theater fan as I am, you know that people are a lot more forgiving with down endings in theater than they are in film, right? And so I think that is where it does get rough. If you're bringing something from the theatrical realm into the cinematic realm, and the studio's now like, no, we don't like that ending from the play. We got to make it a Hollywood ending, which is, to catch a phrase, Hollywood ending. That's what causes the movie to, let's say, falter at the end. But I still think there's way too much good to let that just ruin it for you. But you know what? Critics didn't disagree with you, man. The movie only has like a 31% on Rotten Tomatoes, and most critics were not favorable. But these two were. They both gave it a thumbs up, and they were probably the most outspoken critics of this movie. So the general critics of the day were more on your side than theirs. This is just one of those instances where they took the different path to their criticism. Much like Speed 2, they took a different path than all the other contemporary critics of the time. So maybe that's just what it is. I'm on that beaten path with Gene and Roger on this movie.
Yeah, and we have to understand, this was an Ernest Scared Stupid episode too. So, I mean, they probably saw that one before this one, but I'm not going to assume. But, this one, I really had a hard time with our critics because everything that they've complained in the past about romantic comedies,
They
movies
just
about
let slide.
it's like all the flaws are like, never mind. It's better than Ernest Scared Stupid. So we'll give it a pass because it made our week. I don't know.
You're
But
grading on the curb of Ernest Scared Stupid.
because
Okay, I mean, yeah, we've done that before. We've done that before where we're like, even though we didn't like the movie, it was the best movie in the block of movies that they did that week, and so we let it grade on a curb. Anyway, okay. Well, so for me, for Gene, like I like this critique, and I agree with him on pretty much everything. I do agree with you that I think that he was too responsive to the idea of the romantic comedy and like whatever he said, the sauciness or spiciness of it. No, I don't disagree with that. I don't agree with that at all. But I can't say that it's a terrible review. It's a B movie for me, B rating, so I'm going to give him a B. I think it's a solid B for him.
now Roger's going to be a little bit different because I do find it interesting, and it made me think a lot about, can performances save a movie? And that could go either way. To me, to an extent, it can make it watchable, it can make it memorable, but it doesn't make it a good movie. And I think Roger leaned really heavily into that, of really focusing on the characters, which goes down to the performances that I spoke to earlier. And I think it was almost a manipulation that the performances were so solid that it made the characters look good. It made the dialogue look good. And when you're a great performer, you can do that, but that doesn't make it a good movie. So I think Roger was manipulated to an extent, and I hate those wordings when it comes to talking about Ebert, but that's what screamed to me when he was reviewing this movie. He gave it 3.5 stars. To me, this is far from 3.5 stars in a written review. So based on kind of what he spoke to on just focusing on more characters, which goes deeper, I liked his enthusiasm. I liked how he was excited about it. So that's going to push me a little bit. So I'm going to give him 2.5 stars on it.
I think that's fair. I don't think that he was being, let's say, out of pocket on any of his opinions because most of his opinions were hand in hand with Gene's, right? It would have been out of pocket if Gene hated the movie and Roger loved it, right? And then I would start kind of, crying bullshit because that was kind of a rarity where one hated a movie so much that the other one liked it. There was usually enough space in between to have at least enough room for discourse and debate, not totally hate it and totally love it, right? So yeah, I think 2.5 is smart for that. But yeah, no, I think this movie is a perfect segue into the movie that you're bringing next week, which is Mel Brooks's film Life Stinks. Now, there is something to be said about this era of filmmaking, right? Like the 80s were opulent because of financial institutions and investing and bullshit bonds. Wolf of Wall Street's a perfect movie to watch about that. Wall Street's a good movie. I love Wall Street, but I don't think it had enough space in hindsight to see the true, let's say the true reaction of society based on the downfall of a lot of those financial institutions. Wolf of Wall Street's a much better movie to at least see what could happen and what did happen to a lot of those, let's say, bad actors in that world. And I feel that middle class America, which is really the predominant class of the 80s and 90s, right? Middle class was a lot better then than middle class now. But one thing that we liked seeing is we like seeing rich people get what's due to them, right? We like seeing things fall apart for people who had it better than us. And I feel that that era of like the late 80s, early 90s really was a good reflection of that. And Life Stinks is a perfect movie to segue from this into that. So I'm kind of excited to watch this one because it's been a minute for me.
The 90s was the decade of having fun with commentary that was now uncomfortable to talk about, but fun to make fun of then. So
right. And it wasn't preachy, right?
100%.
Like the satire was still thick, right? Irony was still thick. You could still get away with making fun of classes without being overly preachy about it. If you put enough satire and irony in a film, you can get those classes to laugh at themselves. But when you start preaching to them and making them feel like shit, well, now they're just going to have like a chip on their shoulder and take pop culture jokes about them out on society. That wasn't happening as much back then. People had thicker skin. We'll get into that in that conversation. But no, I think that this is a really good pairing. Probably one of my favorite pairings we've done in a long time of back-to-back movies.
And there's nobody better to do a satire than Mel Brooks when it comes
Than
to
Mel Brooks. Thick with irony, right? I can't wait. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for watching, listening. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow our YouTube channel. Subscribe, leave a review, rate, comment, and leave a suggestion for any films you'd like to see us cover, as long as it was in the Siskel and Ebert years and the video exists online so we can use the sound bites. You can find me, Antonio, host of the Cult Worthy Cinema Podcast, over at thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host Justin Henson over at
the Movie Wire Podcast at themoviewire.com.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.